Valeria had never imagined that her life could shift so dramatically over a single seemingly insignificant decision made on a drizzly afternoon. She and her husband, Matteo, had just moved into a prestigious neighborhood, a place where grand villas stood proudly, surrounded by lush green gardens and vibrant carnations that stretched out like a painting. It was the dream Valeria had nurtured through their toughest days, back when Matteo was just a lowly employee, scraping by on a meager salary. But then fortune smiled on them. Matteo's business took off unexpectedly, money began pouring in like a stream, and to celebrate their upcoming wedding anniversary, he gave her the gift she'd longed for, a stunning two-story house. Every corner of it radiated the kind of elegance Valeria had only dared to dream of. The house captivated her from the very first glance. She wandered through each room, her fingers brushing lightly against the intricately patterned wallpaper, her eyes lingering on delicate white porcelain statues and the small framed pictures scattered here and there. In her hand, she held a little notebook where she jotted down meticulous notes, things to add or remove to make this house truly their own. The bedroom delighted her with its soft blue cornflower hues, a spacious double bed draped in silver-threaded silk, and thick curtains promising peaceful nights of sleep. But when she stepped into the living room, bathed in warm golden light that seemed to hum with life, Valeria paused. Something felt off. The walls were strangely bare, almost crying out for something to fill the empty space. Paintings, she murmured to herself, scribbling quickly in her notebook. I need to find some perfect paintings. The next day, Valeria drove into the city, determined to hunt down artwork that matched her vision. She'd already picked up a few pieces of furniture, a small coffee table, new bathroom curtains, and a walnut-framed mirror, but the paintings still eluded her. She stopped by a modest gallery tucked away in an old alley, its faded sign reading "Weekend Sale" in messy white chalk. Inside, the space was wide but quiet, with only a handful of people silently admiring the canvases hanging loosely on the walls. Valeria passed by rows of large frames, dark blues and gloomy greens, somber faces painted with heavy melancholic strokes. No, she shook her head. These wouldn't do for her radiant living room. She wanted something bright, something bursting with joy, a reflection of the happiness her new home brought her. Just as she was about to give up, her eyes caught a glimpse of something in a dim corner of the room. There, beneath the faint glow of a golden lamp, sat a small painting, covered in a thin layer of dust, as if it had been forgotten for years. She stepped closer, her heart beating a little faster for reasons she couldn't name. The painting depicted a young girl, perhaps 18, with chestnut curls tumbling over her forehead, a freckled nose, and eyes so bright they seemed to speak. She wore a vivid yellow dress and sat on a lush green field, a hand-woven dandelion crown resting on her head. The light in the painting seemed to spill outward, warm and alive, as if an entire summer day had been captured in every brushstroke. Valeria could feel the artist's fierce love for this girl, a raw, real emotion that sent shivers down her spine. She bent down and lifted the painting with both hands. It was surprisingly light, almost fragile, like a whisper of a thing caught between worlds. In the bottom corner, a scrawled M.R. marked the canvas in black ink, though Valeria had no clue who that might be. The price tag beside it stopped her cold. Just a few coins, practically a giveaway. How could this be? She wondered aloud. Valeria had studied art in college, and she knew this was no amateur's work. The artist was a master, their skill and soul woven into every line and shade. So why was it priced so low? She carried the painting to the counter, where a thin woman with pale blue eyes like glass greeted her. "This," Valeria began, her voice hesitant. "It's so beautiful. Why is it so cheap?" The woman smiled, a faint enigmatic curve of her lips. "I wondered the same thing when it arrived from Europe. The artist insisted it be sold for that price. I don't know why, and I don't know who they are. Just the initials MR. That's all we've got." Valeria nodded, still unsettled but intrigued. She pulled the money from her purse, declined the offer to wrap it, and cradled the painting in her arms like a treasure as she left the gallery. When she set it on the back seat of her car, she stole one last glance. The girl in the painting seemed to smile at her, a gentle, mysterious smile, as if she knew something Valeria couldn't yet fathom. Valeria set the small painting on the velvet sofa in the living room, stepping back a few paces to admire it. The light from the crystal chandelier overhead spilled down, igniting the brilliant yellow of the girl's dress in the painting. The hand-woven dandelion crown atop her head seemed to sway in an invisible breeze, and her sparkling eyes held the endless expanse of a summer sky. "You'll be the soul of this room," Valeria whispered, a smile tugging at her lips as she indulged the thought. She didn't hang it up just yet. There was still so much to do in their new home, arranging furniture, swapping out curtains, wiping away dust from forgotten corners. But every time she passed the painting, she paused, feeling as though the girl's gaze followed her every step. Matteo came home late, as usual, his shoulders slumped from endless meetings. Valeria had prepared a simple yet warm dinner, fragrant mushroom pasta and a glass of red wine. He sank into a chair, offering her a tired but tender smile. "Did you visit the new house today?" he asked, twirling a spoonful of pasta. Valeria nodded, her eyes lighting up as she recounted her day. "Everything's amazing, honey. The rooms are perfect, just a few little tweaks needed. I've written it all down in my notebook. Tomorrow I'll grab some more things." Matteo chuckled softly, pulling her into a warm embrace. "You're the smartest wife I've ever known," he said, pressing a gentle kiss to her cheek. Valeria laughed, her heart swelling with joy. "Next weekend we can move in for good," she declared confidently. Matteo nodded, his eyes twinkling with excitement. "I can't wait." The next day, Valeria dove into shopping. She picked out a set of wooden coat hangers, a plush rug for the living room, and a small mirror for the hallway. But in her mind, the painting remained the centerpiece. When she returned to the new house, she carried it into the living room, set it on the table, and gazed at it again. "This is your spot," she said, as if chatting with the girl in the frame. But then she got swept up arranging her new purchases and left it there. Before leaving, she cast one last glance at the painting. A strange feeling bubbled up inside her, joy tinged with something she couldn't quite name, as if the painting were waiting for something bigger. A week flew by in a blur. Valeria and Matteo officially moved into their new home. They wandered through each room together, giggling as Matteo pointed out the tiny details Valeria had so carefully tended to: a porcelain vase on the dining table, fresh curtains in the bedroom, books on the shelf arranged by color. "You're an absolute genius," Matteo said, pulling her in for a soft kiss. Valeria smiled, taking his hand and leading him to the living room. "There's one thing I haven't figured out yet," she admitted, gesturing to the painting still resting on the sofa. "It needs to be hung up, but I've got no idea how to use a hammer and nails." Matteo burst out laughing, his eyes shining with affection. "That's my girl. Don't worry, I've got it." He disappeared into the tool shed and returned with a hammer and a handful of nails. In just 15 minutes, the painting hung neatly on the main wall of the living room, facing the large window. Valeria stood back, admiring their handiwork, or rather Matteo's, and felt a wave of complete happiness wash over her. The girl in the painting now seemed to blend into the room, the golden light from the walls spilling into every brushstroke, bringing the space to life like never before. "Now it's perfect," she said. Matteo nodded, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "How about we go out tonight to celebrate? A little restaurant just to toast the new house?" But Valeria shook her head, smiling softly. "No, I want to stay here. I'll cook something amazing. Can you wait a bit?" Matteo laughed heartily. "Of course I can. Your cooking beats any restaurant hands down." That night's dinner was a triumph. Valeria's wine-braised beef melted in their mouths, and Matteo couldn't stop raving. They sat together, talking and laughing, savoring their first moments in their new nest. But that night, as pale moonlight slipped through the curtains, Valeria jolted awake. A strange sound echoed through the house, not the whistle of wind through a crack or the tap of branches against glass. It was more like the whisper of a grassy field, soft yet persistent, tugging her from sleep. Matteo lay beside her, breathing steadily in his deep slumber. Valeria sat up, her heart pounding faster than usual. She slipped out from under the covers, padding downstairs in her thin nightgown, her bare feet icy against the wooden floor. When she stepped into the living room, she froze. The painting on the wall, it was glowing. Not a brilliant blaze, but a faint golden halo, ethereal and dreamlike, as if the girl's dress were radiating its own light. Valeria blinked, convincing herself she was dreaming. But as she drew closer, the whispering grew clearer, like wind rustling through a meadow, carrying the breath of summer. "Is this real?" she murmured, reaching out to touch the frame. The wood was cold, yet a strange warmth pulsed through her fingertips. Valeria stepped back, her heart hammering. She raced upstairs, shaking Matteo awake. "Honey, get up. Something's weird." He stirred, his voice thick with sleep. "What's wrong?" She dragged him downstairs, pointing at the painting, but when they stood there, the glow was gone. The painting looked normal again, the girl in the yellow dress smiling silently as always. "I swear it was glowing, Matteo," Valeria said, her voice trembling. He chuckled, wrapping her in a hug. "You're probably just exhausted and imagining things. Let's go back to bed. I'll check it out tomorrow." Valeria nodded, but as she climbed back into bed, sleep wouldn't come. That feeling, joy laced with unease, clung to her like a shadow. The next morning, over breakfast, Valeria recounted the night to Matteo. He laughed loudly, teasing that she should write horror stories, but she didn't laugh back. "I'm serious," she said. "It didn't feel like a hallucination. There's something special about that painting." Matteo nodded, his tone softening to comfort her. "If it's bothering you, I'll look into who painted it. But for now, let's just enjoy the new house, okay?" Valeria agreed, though in her heart, the painting was no longer just decor. It felt like a doorway to something bigger, something she couldn't yet name. That evening, Matteo suggested inviting the neighbors over to get acquainted. "I met them yesterday," he said. "An older couple, live in a villa twice the size of ours. Really nice, educated folks. I think you'd get along." Valeria nodded. "Let's have them over for dinner on Saturday. I'll cook." Matteo grinned, kissing her forehead. "That's my wife." Little did they know that dinner would peel back the mystery hidden within the painting. A story far beyond anything they could imagine, one that would change their lives forever. Saturday arrived faster than Valeria had expected. All day she buzzed around the kitchen, determined to whip up a dinner that would dazzle their new neighbors. The rich aroma of wine-braised beef filled the house, mingling with the warm cinnamon scent of the apple pie she'd hastily baked. Matteo wandered in and out, setting the table while playfully teasing her. "What, are you trying to stun the whole world with your cooking?" He grinned, sneaking a bite of the still warm pie. Valeria swatted his hand, feigning sternness. "No stealing, that's for the guests." Matteo shrugged, but his eyes sparkled with delight. Valeria cherished these moments, simple, cozy, as if this new house was truly where they belonged. As dusk settled, the doorbell chimed. Valeria wiped her hands on her apron and hurried to the door with Matteo. Standing there was an elderly couple, their elegance undimmed by time's gentle wear. The woman, petite with neatly cropped silver hair, had pale blue eyes that gleamed like weathered gems. The man, tall and broad, with salt and pepper hair, carried a quiet dignity in his simple grey blazer. "We're Sophia and Antonio," the woman said, her voice soft yet resonant. "So nice to meet you both." Valeria smiled, shaking their hands. "Hi, come on in, dinner's ready." The four of them stepped inside, exchanging small talk about the neighborhood and the weather. Valeria led the guests into the living room, where a small table awaited, draped in crisp white linen and flickering with candlelight. But the moment Sophia and Antonio crossed the threshold, the air shifted, thickening with an unspoken weight. Sophia froze, her trembling hands flying to her mouth, a small cry escaping her lips. Antonio stood rigid, his eyes wide, his face draining of color as if he'd seen a ghost. Valeria turned, startled by their reaction. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. Matteo stepped forward, resting a hand on Antonio's shoulder, but the older man didn't respond. Their gazes were locked on one spot, the painting of the girl in the yellow dress. Valeria followed their stares, her pulse quickening. The painting hung silently on the wall, its dandelion crown and gentle smile illuminated by the chandelier's glow. But to Sophia and Antonio, it was clearly more than just art. "It can't be," Sophia whispered, her voice breaking as if on the verge of tears. Antonio gripped his wife's hand, his own trembling just as fiercely. "It's her. That's her," he muttered, his eyes brimming red. Valeria exchanged a confused glance with Matteo. "Do you know the girl in the painting?" she asked, struggling to keep her tone steady. Sophia drew a shaky breath, summoning the strength to speak. "We do," she said, her voice quivering. "That's Clara, the love of our son Miguel's life." Antonio nodded, his voice low and rough. "And more than that, this painting, it's like it was done by his own hand." A chill raced down Valeria's spine. She recalled the scrawled M.R. in the corner. Could it stand for Miguel? "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice softening. Sophia stepped closer to the painting, her hand hovering as if to touch it, then stopping mid-air. "We thought Clara was dead, and Miguel too," she said, tears streaking down her wrinkled cheeks. "But if this painting's here, maybe we were wrong." Matteo jumped in, trying to ease the tension. "Why don't you both sit down and tell us slowly? This sounds like it needs time." Sophia nodded, letting Antonio guide her to the sofa. Valeria poured them water, her mind buzzing with curiosity and unease. Once they were all seated, Sophia began, her voice drifting into a distant memory. "Miguel was our only son," she said. "He grew up with everything, but he was never arrogant. From a young age, he loved to paint, vibrant, emotional works that even I, clueless about art, couldn't help but admire. But we wanted him to follow in Antonio's footsteps, to take up business. We forced him into a prestigious school, planned his future without ever asking what he wanted." Antonio picked up the thread, his tone heavy with regret. "Then he met Clara. She was a poor girl from the old part of town, near an abandoned soccer field. He met her one day playing with friends, and from then on, everything changed. Clara was unlike anyone we'd ever known, innocent, fierce, with a smile that could melt anything. Miguel fell for her, loved her so deeply he threw away the life we'd built for him." Sophia wiped her tears, managing a faint smile. "I only met Clara once, at a dinner Miguel begged us to attend. She wore a cheap dress, her hair a mess, but her eyes blazed with life. I was cold to her, thinking she wasn't good enough for my son. I regret that now." Valeria listened, her chest tightening. She glanced at the painting. The girl in the yellow dress was no longer a stranger, but a piece of a heartbreaking tale. "What happened next?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Antonio sighed. "Miguel ran away. He left a letter saying he couldn't live the way we wanted. He chose Clara and his art. We searched everywhere, but there was no trace. A year later, rumors surfaced that Miguel and Clara had died in Europe. A fire in an art studio. We could never confirm it, but from then on, we believed we'd lost them. Sophia clutched her husband's hand, her voice growing urgent. But this painting, it's too much like Clara, and the brushstrokes, the style. I'd know Miguel's work anywhere. If he's alive, if they both are. She trailed off, tears falling anew. Valeria shivered, remembering the strange glow from the painting the night before, the whispering like wind over a field. I bought it at a small gallery in the city, she said. The owner told me it came from Europe, but they didn't know the artist. The price was bizarrely low, just a few coins. Antonio's head snapped up, his eyes blazing. Do you remember the address? We need to go there. If Miguel's out there, we have to find him. Valeria nodded, grabbing a pen and paper to jot down the details. I hope you find him, she said sincerely. Sophia squeezed her hand, whispering, Thank you. This painting, it's not just a thing, it's a glimmer of hope. The dinner that followed was quiet. Sophia and Antonio barely ate, their minds clearly elsewhere. When they left, Valeria watched them go, her heart heavy. She turned. Valeria sat quietly on the sofa, her gaze locked on the painting of the girl in the yellow dress. After the emotionally charged evening with Sophia and Antonio, their story refused to leave her mind. Thoughts of Miguel, their son, and Clara, his beloved, swirled endlessly. The painting was no longer just a decoration. It had become a portal to the past, a tale woven with love, sacrifice, and loss. Valeria closed her eyes, letting her thoughts drift back to what Sophia had shared, as if she could see Miguel and Clara taking shape through the brushstrokes on the canvas. Over 20 years ago, Miguel was a boy raised in the lap of luxury. In the very same affluent neighborhood Valeria and Matteo now called home. His house stood among majestic villas, where intricately wrought iron gates guarded gardens perpetually fragrant with flowers. Sophia and Antonio, his parents, were driven by ambition. Antonio ran a thriving company, while Sophia dreamed of the day Miguel would follow in his father's footsteps, donning an expensive suit as a successful businessman. But Miguel was cut from a different cloth. From a young age, he was captivated by pencils and watercolors, spending hours in his room creating vibrant paintings, fantastical forests, soaring dragons, and sometimes faces he'd never met, yet rendered so vividly they seemed alive. When Miguel turned 14, his life changed forever. One afternoon after school, he slipped away from the polished streets of his neighborhood to an old soccer field in the nearby slums, a place Sophia and Antonio forbade him from visiting. There, amid narrow alleys strung with drying laundry and kids playing on dusty ground, Miguel found freedom. He kicked a ball around with friends, a mix of rich kids like him and poor ones with nothing but tattered sandals. Wealth didn't matter there, only laughter and the thud of the ball echoed through the crumbling space. Then one day, amid the clamor of barking dogs in a cramped alley, Miguel met Clara. She stood there, her skinny arms clutching a dry stick, fending off a pack of stray dogs circling her little red and white pup. Her chestnut curls were a wild mess, her oversized thrift store t-shirt dwarfing her small frame, but her big brown eyes blazed with determination. "Let me help," one of Miguel's friends shouted, snatching the stick from Clara to chase off the dogs. Miguel watched, struck by a fleeting thought. Clara looked like a figure from one of his paintings, fierce yet fragile, like a dandelion caught in the wind. From that day, Clara started showing up at the soccer field more often. She'd perch on the rickety wooden bleachers, legs swinging, her eyes glued to Miguel's every kick. He didn't know why, but her presence made his heart race. He tried to ignore it, focusing on the ball, yet his gaze kept drifting to her. One rainy day, with the sky heavy and grey and the field deserted, Clara appeared again, her little dog trotting beside her. Miguel stopped playing and approached the bleachers, a water bottle in hand. "Aren't you scared of me?" Clara teased, her voice playful. Miguel shook his head, feigning nonchalance. "Why would I be?" She grinned, a smile that pierced through the dreary rain. "Because you're a rich kid and I'm not." They started talking, about dreams, about what they'd do if life didn't chain them down. Clara said she wanted to be rich, not for fancy dresses or cars, but to lift her family out of their leaky shack and buy medicine for her sickly mother. Miguel listened, wondering for the first time if he was as free as he'd thought. When the rain poured harder, Clara grabbed his hand, pulling him through twisting alleys to take shelter under the overhang of an old house. They stood close, their breaths mingling in the damp air. Miguel caught the scent of her hair, wild grass, rain, and a faint sweetness like cherry blossoms. He closed his eyes, letting the moment sear itself into his memory. Clara led him to a special place, old Pablo's studio, hidden in the basement of that crumbling house. Stepping inside, Miguel felt like he'd entered another world. Massive paintings covered the walls, fairies, dragons, princesses, and mythical creatures, all alive under the faint glow of a worn floor lamp. Pablo, with his wild white hair and paint-splattered clothes, turned to Miguel with sharp, knowing eyes. "You've got an artist's hands, boy," he said, his voice deep and weathered. Miguel blushed, but Clara laughed. "He's better at soccer than painting, mister." Pablo just smiled, as if he saw something deeper in the boy. From then on, Miguel visited Pablo's studio regularly. The old man taught him how to mix colors, wield a brush, and pour his soul onto the canvas. Clara came too, sometimes posing for Miguel. One day he painted her in an imagined yellow dress, crowned with a dandelion wreath, the very painting Valeria would later find. When he showed it to Pablo, the old man nodded. "There's love in this one, Miguel. Don't lose it." Miguel's face burned, but in his heart he knew Pablo was right. Clara wasn't just a friend, she was the light in his world, but that happiness didn't last. By 18, the pressure from his family grew suffocating. Sofia and Antonio had enrolled him in a prestigious business school, his future mapped out in numbers and contracts. Miguel resisted, but it was futile. One night, he brought Clara to meet his parents, hoping they'd accept her. She wore the simplest pink dress she owned, her hair tied back neatly, but Sofia's gaze was icy. "She doesn't belong in our world," she said, after Clara left. Antonio stayed silent, his agreement etched in his expression. Miguel exploded. "You don't see who she really is. I love Clara, and I don't need your world." He stormed to his room, slamming the door. The night before he was due to start school, Miguel vanished. He left a brief note. "I'm sorry, but I can't live your way. I choose Clara and art. Don't look for me." Sofia collapsed in tears reading it, while Antonio called the police, but no one could find him. Years later, rumors trickled in that Miguel and Clara had perished in a fire in Paris, where they'd fled to start over. Sofia and Antonio lived in agony, convinced they'd lost their son forever. Valeria opened her eyes, snapping back to the present. She stared at the painting, her heart clenching. The girl in the yellow dress, Clara, wasn't just an image. She was the embodiment of Miguel's love and sacrifice. But if Sofia and Antonio were right, if Miguel was still alive and had painted this, then the story wasn't over. Valeria stood, stepping closer to the painting. In the dim lamplight, the girl seemed to smile at her, as if whispering, "Help them find me." Valeria took a deep breath, knowing that tomorrow, when Sofia and Antonio visited the gallery, the mystery would begin to unravel. After the emotionally charged evening with Sofia and Antonio, Valeria couldn't find peace in sleep. She lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, while Matteo breathed steadily beside her. The image of the painting, the girl in the yellow dress with her dandelion crown, haunted her mind, intertwined with Sofia's choked words. "If Miguel's still alive, we need to find him." Valeria knew now that the painting wasn't just a random find, it was a bridge between past and present, connecting people torn apart by time and prejudice. She slipped out of bed, padding downstairs through the darkness, her gaze settling once more on the painting. Under the faint moonlight streaming through the window, the girl, Clara, seemed to watch her, her smile carrying a quiet urgency, almost a plea. The next morning, Sophia and Antonio arrived at Valeria's doorstep earlier than expected. They stood there, hands clasped tightly, their red-rimmed eyes shimmering with fragile hope. "We've made up our minds," Antonio said, his voice low but resolute. "We're going to Paris. If that painting came from Europe, maybe Miguel's still there." Sophia nodded, her voice trembling as she added, "You gave us the gallery's address. We need to go now. We can't wait any longer." Valeria's heart tightened. She handed them the slip of paper with the address, wrapping them in a warm hug. "I hope you find him," she said, her eyes glistening. Sophia squeezed her hand, whispering, "Thank you, Valeria. You've brought hope back to us." The flight to Paris was long and tense. Sophia sat by the window, her gaze lost in the endless white clouds, her hands clutching a small purse that held the gallery's address Valeria had given them. Antonio sat beside her, silent, his grip on her hand unwavering, as if steadying them both. When the plane touched down, Paris greeted them with a persistent drizzle, raindrops streaking the taxi windows as they rode to their hotel. They didn't rest. Despite the exhaustion of the journey, Sophia and Antonio changed clothes, grabbed an umbrella, and set out immediately for the address. A small gallery tucked away on an ancient cobblestone street. The gallery emerged before them, modest and weathered, its faded wooden sign swaying gently above the door. Inside, the space was warm but hushed, with only a scattering of paintings hanging loosely on the walls and a middle-aged man, in round glasses, standing behind the counter. He wore a slightly rumpled grey suit, his sharp eyes studying the two elderly visitors as they stepped in. "We've come from far away," Antonio began, his voice hoarse with fatigue. "We're looking for our son, Miguel Rivera. He's an artist. We believe one of his paintings came from here." Sophia jumped in, her voice brimming with hope. "His name's Miguel. Do you know anything about him?" The man frowned, hesitating. After a brief silence, he shook his head. "I don't know that name," he said stiffly. "We get paintings from many sources, but I don't keep track of the artists." Antonio locked eyes with him, sensing the lie beneath the words. "Are you sure?" he pressed, his tone dropping. "This painting's too unique to be forgotten. It's of a girl in a yellow dress with a dandelion crown. We need the truth." The man shrugged, avoiding Antonio's gaze. "I can't help you further," he said. Sophia stepped forward, her trembling hands resting on the counter. "Please," she whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. "If you know anything about Miguel, tell him his parents want to see him again. We regret what we did. We're staying at the Four Seasons. Please." The man gave a curt nod, but his eyes remained cold. Sophia and Antonio left, their hearts sinking. They stepped outside into the worsening rain, the weight of defeat pressing down on them like a stone. The next day, they wandered Paris to clear their minds. The cobblestone streets glistened under the drizzle, and the scent of fresh-baked bread wafted from tiny cafes, but Sophia and Antonio couldn't take it in. They returned to the hotel in the afternoon, drenched and weary. But as they stepped into the grand lobby of the Four Seasons, they froze. A man stood near the reception desk, his figure gaunt, his scruffy beard and threadbare coat marking years of hardship. He turned, and Sophia gasped, tears bursting forth as she recognized those eyes. Miguel's eyes, now weary and hollow. "Miguel!" Sophia rushed forward, throwing her arms around him. Antonio followed, his trembling hand touching his son's shoulder. Miguel stood still, his gaze distant, but slowly he softened in his mother's embrace. "Mom, Dad," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I thought you'd never forgive me." Sophia shook her head, tears streaming endlessly. No, son. We're the ones who need forgiveness. We were wrong to force you, to reject Clara. Your painting brought us here. Miguel looked up, startled. The painting? You mean the one of Clara? They settled into a quiet corner of the lobby where the soft glow of a massive chandelier cast a gentle light. Miguel began to speak, his voice heavy with sorrow, like the rain outside. Clara and I came to Paris after we left. I became an artist, just like I dreamed. My paintings were displayed in galleries, and we made decent money. We planned to marry, to build a new life. But then Clara got sick. A terminal illness. I poured everything we had into her treatment, but it wasn't enough. I sold everything, even my most precious paintings, for next to nothing just to scrape by. That painting of Clara, I didn't want to let it go, but I had no choice. Sophia gripped his hand, her heart aching. Where's Clara now? She asked, her voice shaking. Miguel bowed his head, tears tracing down his cheeks. She's fading. She needs surgery, but I can't afford it. I've tried everything, but I can't save her. Antonio placed a firm hand on his son's. How much? I'll cover it all. We're family, Miguel. You don't have to face this alone anymore. Miguel looked up, disbelief in his eyes. Really? He asked, his voice cracking. Sophia nodded, smiling through her tears. Really, Clara will get better and we'll throw you to a wedding. Then you'll paint us a portrait, okay? Miguel pulled his parents into a tight hug, sobbing like a child. For the first time in over 20 years, he felt he wasn't alone. They left the lobby, stepping out into the rain, but this time it didn't feel cold. It was like a promise, that the pain would pass and their family would be whole again. A few days later, Valeria's phone rang. It was Sophia, her voice brimming with joy. We found Miguel, she said. Clara's getting surgery and things are looking up. Thank you, Valeria. Without that painting, we wouldn't have this day. Valeria smiled, setting the phone down. She walked to the living room, gazing at the painting once more. The girl in the yellow dress seemed to smile brighter than ever. Get well, Clara, Valeria whispered. That night, the whispering of the grassy fields was gone, replaced by the stillness of hope. Valeria sat by the living room window, the morning sunlight streaming through the glass and illuminating the painting on the wall. The girl in the yellow dress, Clara, seemed to smile at her, her eyes sparkling with the brilliance of a summer day. Since Sophia's call a few days ago, Valeria couldn't stop thinking about Miguel and Clara's story, about their tearful reunion with Sophia and Antonio. The phone rang, snapping her out of her reverie. She picked it up, and Sophia's voice came through, brimming with joy tinged with exhaustion. Valeria, we just got back from the hospital, she said. Clara's surgery was a success. Miguel's with her now. Everything. It's better than we ever dared hope. Valeria smiled, a wave of relief washing over her. I'm so happy, Sophia. How are you and Antonio holding up? It must have been exhausting. Sophia chuckled softly, her voice warm like the sunlight outside. Yes, it's been tiring, but worth it. We've found Miguel again, and now Clara's going to recover. It's all because of you, because of that painting. We'll be fine after a little rest. Valeria nodded, even though Sophia couldn't see. Take care, okay? I wish Clara a speedy recovery. As she hung up, she gazed out at the garden where the trees swayed gently. A rare peace settled over her. Matteo walked in, carrying 2 paper bags stuffed with fresh vegetables and bread from the market. He set them on the table, kissed her forehead, and noticed her thoughtful expression. What's up? Something on your mind? He asked, pulling out a pack of fragrant cookies. Valeria turned, smiling. Sophia just called. Clara's surgery went well. They've got Miguel back, and things are looking up. Matteo raised an eyebrow, grinning broadly. Really? A happy ending, then? I told you it'd all work out. He pecked her cheek and headed to the kitchen to unpack. Valeria followed, helping him stow the veggies in the fridge. "Yeah, you were right," she said softly. "But I can't stop thinking about that painting. It's like a miracle." Matteo glanced back, curiosity in his eyes. "You still think there's something weird about it, don't you?" Valeria nodded, grabbing an apple from the bag and taking a bite. "Don't you? That night I saw it glow, those whispers, and how it led Sofia and Antonio to Miguel. It's more than just a painting, Matteo." He laughed, patting her shoulder. "Maybe you're onto something. But it's done its job now, right? As long as Clara recovers and everyone's happy, that's what matters." Valeria nodded, though a tiny thread of unease lingered, as if the story wasn't fully closed. That night, with Matteo fast asleep, Valeria heard the whispers again, the soft rustle of wind through a grassy field, faint but unmistakable. She crept downstairs, her heart beating faster. The painting was glowing again, but this time it wasn't the eerie haze she'd seen before. It was a gentle, warm light, like the first rays of dawn. Valeria stood still, feeling an odd serenity radiating from it. "Thank you, Clara," she whispered, as if the girl in the painting could hear. The whispers faded, the glow dimmed, and the painting returned to its quiet beauty. Valeria smiled, feeling for the first time that the story had truly ended. But fate loves a twist. A month later, as Valeria tidied the house, the doorbell rang. She opened it to find a delivery man holding a small package. "For Valeria," he said, handing it over before leaving. Frowning, she couldn't recall ordering anything. She brought it to the living room, unwrapping it under the window's light. Inside was a painting, not large but stunning enough to stop her cold. It depicted her and Matteo on the living room sofa next to Clara's painting. Valeria was laughing, a teacup in hand, while Matteo gazed at her with tender eyes. Every detail was uncannily lifelike, as if someone had stood right there to capture them. In the corner, the familiar M.R. signature sat beside a scrawled note in black ink. "Thank you for bringing me home." Valeria's hands trembled as she set the painting down. She glanced at Clara's picture, feeling as though the two girls were speaking through the brushstrokes. "Miguel," she murmured, her heart pounding. She didn't know when he'd painted this or how he'd seen her and Matteo. But those words, they were gratitude, a farewell, and a promise that he'd never forget what she'd done. "Matteo, come look at this," she called, her voice shaky. He bounded in, eyes widening at the new painting. He read the note, then turned to her. "What's this? Who sent it?" Valeria shook her head. "Miguel, I think. He painted it to thank me." Matteo picked it up, admiring it. "He's got talent, no doubt. But how'd he know what we looked like?" Valeria didn't answer right away. She stepped to the window, gazing at the garden. "Maybe he's been watching us through that painting," she said, half joking, half serious. Matteo burst out laughing. "You and your imagination, but it's gorgeous." That night, Valeria hung the new painting beside Clara's. Together, they complemented each other, one a testament to a past of love and sacrifice, the other a present of gratitude and connection. As she stepped back to admire them, a strange feeling welled up. She heard the whisper of the grassy wind again, but this time it came from the new painting, not Clara's. It didn't frighten her, it brought a warmth she couldn't explain. Valeria smiled, whispering, "Be happy, Miguel and Clara." Weeks later, Sofia called again. "Valeria, we just threw a little party for Miguel and Clara," she said, her voice radiant. "Clara's so much better, and Miguel's painting again. He said he'd send you a gift, but wouldn't tell me what. Did you get it?" Valeria glanced at the painting, smiling. "Yes, I did. I love it." Sofia laughed heartily. "Wonderful. We're planning their wedding now. When it's ready, you and Matteo have to come." Valeria nodded. "Absolutely, Sofia." Hanging up, Valeria sank onto the sofa, gazing at the two paintings. She pictured Miguel and Clara at their wedding, Sofia and Antonio beaming, a family reunited after years apart. Clara's painting no longer glowed, but Valeria knew its mission was complete. She stood, joining Matteo in the kitchen where he was cooking dinner. "You know," she said, wrapping her arms around him from behind, "I think we should hang more paintings in the house." He turned, laughing. "As long as they don't glow in the middle of the night." They laughed together, and the house filled with joy once more. That night, Valeria slept better than ever. No whispers, no strange lights. But in her dreams, she saw Clara in her yellow dress, standing in a field of dandelions, smiling and waving. Beside her was Miguel, paintbrush in hand, his eyes alight with happiness. Valeria woke with a smile, knowing that somewhere in Paris a beautiful story had truly ended and begun anew, in the glow of love and art. Hey everyone, that's the end of our mysterious painting tale and the emotional journey of Valeria, Miguel, Clara and their family. I hope you've enjoyed this roller coaster as much as I have. If you got chills when Valeria uncovered the painting's secrets or teared up at Miguel and Clara's warm, happy ending, please hit that like button. It's the best way to support me and keep these stories coming. What did you think of the new painting Miguel sent Valeria? Pretty wild that it showed up out of nowhere, right? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to chat with you about it. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss out on more thrilling tales. And don't forget to ring the bell to be the first to catch every mysterious story I share next. Thanks so much for joining me. See you in the next one.